Welcome to the Underwater Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the world of underwater portrait photography, cinematography, and everything in between. With me, your host, Brett Stanley. Welcome back to the Underwater Podcast, and this week we're talking experimental photography with artist Barbara Cole. Barbara's underwater work spans over 20 years, and her approach to photography is akin to alchemy, where she pushes the boundaries of what can be done with the tools available, and even creating her own to accomplish the task. She's had great success with vintage processing techniques such as Tintype and wet Collodion, and her images are more like paintings than they are photographs. Okay, let's dive in. Barbara, welcome to the Underwater Podcast.
Thanks, Brett. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, you're in Toronto, is that right?
That's right.
Is it starting to warm up there, or is it still bloody cold?
It's 3 degrees right now, but we had warm weather on Monday for about an hour. We're getting there. We're getting there eventually.
Yeah. So how does that affect you in terms of your creativity, like having such an off season, closed season?
It's really interesting because I used to spend the off season retouching what I'd shot, because a lot of my work is combining other pictures. So it is quite a lengthy, editing is quite a lengthy process. But my assistant once said to me, maybe 10, 15 years ago, Barb, you've got to get a 1-2 punch. And with that, I started working in wet Collodion, which is the Tintype process from years gone by. And it's literally taken, I never finish on time with that. So I start when my pool closes, sometime in September. And then I'm finishing about now, except this year I'm not finishing. I have to go in September, I have to go around again. But it's really great. I think that it's really great to be able to have that change. It makes things more stimulating and gets you, some new creativity, new juices flowing.
Is that what you find? Like it's kind of with that lack of being able to get in the water, it's kind of fueling you for when you do get back in the water, like you're already energized to get back? Yeah.
I mean, it gives you time to really understand what you shot last year. And even, so many times I thought I had the work, the series that I was working on, I thought I had it and it was done. And then sometimes, over the time period between when I stopped shooting and when I got back in the water, I realized that I was close, but I haven't gotten there yet. And I will toss the entire show out and start again. But now I've got the nucleus of what it was that I was really intending to do, what really inspired me. I think it's great to have that period of rest where your subconscious will kind of just start looking at your work. It's not fresh anymore. It's not exciting because you've seen it, you've shot it, and that's what it is. Then you start seeing it as a layperson would look at it if it was on the wall, and you realize that, maybe it's not fully focused. So it does save you a bit to have that period of time to think and cool down and see if you've done a good job or you actually shot what you had in your mind's eye.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, because I think if you try to edit too close to when you shot it, you're too close to it. You're too in it, and you're too in that moment, I think.
It's so interesting because what you choose when I edit a show, usually they span 2 summers. When I edit a show after the first summer, it is entirely different than what ends up on the wall in the gallery.
Because you've had that time and it gestates and you look at it differently.
Yeah, you look at it differently and you go in just a slightly different direction, but it makes everything click. It's just a tiny tweak. Sometimes just a tiny tweak. Sometimes it's more than that, but usually it's just you came close and you were excited because you were happy you got it. You got anything because that idea was like fleeting and hard to pin down. So you're just deliriously happy that you think you got it, but then you look at it and it's not quite Right. But you go, okay, well, I'm glad I did that because now I can go to the next level, which is, just a tighter edit
Yeah.
and going back out at it again from that point of view.
So it's almost like you kind of like almost prototyping. Like you do it once and then think it either does work or it doesn't, and then you learn from it, and then you kind of do it again, knowing what you've learned.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is not to get discouraged because you put your heart and soul into it, in every shoot you're really trying to hit the bullseye. And when you realize the whole summer's gone by and, you missed the target, it can be, deflating for sure. But over the years, I've just found that that's just the process of creating.
Yeah, that's totally my kind of take on it as well. And there was an interesting chat, in a few kind of Facebook groups about underwater photography, and a photographer was lamenting how, yesterday they did a shoot and it made them want to quit, and they kind of asked the question of what does everyone else do? How do you kind of handle that? So what's your take on that?
Well, I've never been a quick study. So for me, I expect that it's going to be hard, but I don't think about it in advance. I don't look at the long game because usually I take on pretty ambitious projects. And if I looked at what would be involved ahead of time, I probably wouldn't do it.
Right.
So I know for myself that this was going to be tough, and maybe it is tough, and maybe that's why it didn't work out. But my mind just keeps clicking, and saying, well, what if this? What if that? And now that I've, set up the initial lighting, or I've seen the results of, a couple of shoots, then I'm no longer at that true beginning point. I'm now just finessing and inching things one way or another. So maybe it wasn't that lens I'm using. Maybe it's not that type of angle that I want, or that light that I'm using. Yeah. But at least I know I have used something and it hasn't worked, so that narrows the field a bit.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way of looking at it, is that you now know what not to do next time.
Yeah. And that happens a lot. Really, you think that you can preconceive something, and it's pretty amazing that you see it in the first place, really. But when you finally shoot it, it's not surprising that it's not right there. And, the other thing is, I work with an assistant and hair and makeup and models and wardrobe, and everybody's got an opinion, and they love it, or you can tell they love it, or they're really trying to love it. And so you start to take the measure of the work just by certain reactions that you're feeling too. So you have to block some of that out and say, I'm not going to be influenced because they don't actually see the end game. But on the other hand, if you're not feeling the vibe from them, you start to re-examine your approach as well.
Right. So you're kind of filtering those responses as to whether you want to take them on board or not.
Yeah. And, sometimes you do and you regret it. And 3 shoots down the line, you're back at your original problem.
Right. Starting
again to fix it. So, I can see that person wanting to quit for sure. Right. Oh, I have a funny story. When I was first starting out, there are no manuals for this type of work. So I was buying books for how to shoot fish and trying to understand the lighting, a gray shark and a gray dress, that kind of thing. And I was renting Nikonos cameras from Nikon, which are the, single lens reflex underwater housed already cameras. And it was a film camera. And everything was manual. You had to set your focus by feet, and you had to set your flash by feet. And underwater things look closer anyways. So, you're just guessing, and things kept coming out blurry for me. So I got this brilliant idea that I would tie a piece of string in different colors. So the yellow piece or the hot pink piece was 2 feet away. And then there'd be a lime green, and that would be like 3 feet away. And I get the model to hold it while I was on the other end. And then I could set things accurately, and it was great. And it worked the first time fabulously. And then I did a shoot right after that, and my film came out really blurry. And that was because I bought cotton string. and it had shrunk
Oh.
in the water. So then I changed to bathroom chain. It was like things you don't realize, things go wrong. You do feel like quitting because you don't understand what you're up against. You're an underwater photographer as well. You get cold and your eyes, lose their focus after a while, and you're watching the model because of course she's not wearing a wetsuit and she's going to be freezing. And is she intimidated? Can she sink, or is she going to float?
Yeah.
Is she struggling to make me happy? But really, she should have come up for breath 4 hours ago.
Yeah.
So there are all these other things, and you don't want to touch. Usually, on land, I'm around. I look on my light meter and my flash packs and what the power is and that sort of thing. But when you're wet and you're in the water, you can't be that hands-on, so you're not always in touch when things go wrong. You haven't seen the light meter, you haven't watched the clouds coming over when you went underwater, and so it's there's all these frustrations, but what can you do? We love it.
Yeah, exactly. And like from my point of view, so I kind of embrace that sort of chaos. My work it lends itself to those things kind of going wrong. I think that I've retroactively gone, I shoot underwater, things can go terribly wrong, so let's kind of just embrace that as our style. And so a lot of my best shots are the ones that weren't planned. Flash didn't go off, or the clouds did come over, or something like that. Do you do that as well? Like, are you kind of rolling with the punches?
I do, but I do roll with the punches. And sometimes you see something you like better, because I shoot now digitally. So I'll come up and look at the card when it's downloaded and try and remember what it was that I did that changed because I liked that particular shot. And sometimes I'll just go with that. I'll say, turn the flash down, or let's not use flash, or we need a reflector, or we need, that kind of thing. But I have to say that most of the time I plan, and when I plan, it goes a lot better from my point of view.
Yeah. Are you pre-visualizing as well? Like, are you kind of sketching things out before you even get in the water?
Yeah, I see it before I get in the water. From my very first roll of film, it's always been like that.
Yeah.
And I knew exactly what I wanted to do right from the moment I started. And so having been a commercial photographer for 30 years, I knew what it entails to be a studio photographer. And I just used those tools underwater. And, when I did fashion shoots or advertising shoots, how buttoned down and planned you have to be, because there's a client on board and they want to see what they drew.
Yeah.
So I just took that kind of discipline, and it's always been my way underwater. And so I would say, this is what I want it to look like. How am I going to get there? And I'd start with that. And usually it was pretty close. Okay,
that's good. Because a lot of the times, I'll try and sketch something sometimes, but generally I'll end up so far away from that original sketch that it's not even worth looking at.
I do, you asked me what I did in my off season, and partly I do a lot of that during the winter, and I'll start designing the shoot one way and then be totally amazed that when it was time to shoot, I had completely pivoted to another idea. Without even knowing I was doing it. I would draw out a certain look and a certain color palette, and then it would be almost the opposite by the time I'd finished fleshing out 10 or 12 pictures. Because I got closer and closer. It was not quite right what I was thinking. Yeah.
It's interesting that kind of mindset because you're saying that what you were thinking you wanted was wrong.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
What I was thinking I wanted wasn't actually what I wanted. It was a preconceived idea, but once I started getting into the idea and the way I would, do that idea, it became more what I had in mind. Once I started laying down the technical aspect of what I was shooting, I realized, of course, this isn't the way you describe it in words.
Right.
So the words would get messed up. The words would mess up my direction and my thinking. But it was when I actually thought through how I was going to create the shot that it started to clarify for me.
That's really
when
interesting.
I used the tools in my mind instead of pen and paper.
Yeah. Because the translation from the brain to the pen and paper, there was like something lost in that translation.
Yeah, it was like, and I've always struggled with words. It's very hard sometimes for me to focus on saying exactly what I want to say.
Yeah.
But if I can do it, then I get it.
Right.
If I'm very hands-on, and I'll also do quite a number of tests before I begin working on a project. I don't just dive in, excuse the metaphor. I actually, stand in the shallow end for quite a bit.
So, and is that like different shoot days, or are you kind of just testing everything before you do the shoot?
Before I begin,
right.
I do a few pretty serious tests where I go at it from what I think I need. If that doesn't look right, I change it up until I get closer and closer and closer. Then I'll go to sleep and I'll look at the work and I'll have a week between tests, and it will start to get clearer. I'll start to be able to communicate what I want to do so I can find the answer.
So you're really searching, you're really preparing, and you're kind of putting in the work to get what you want. Yeah.
Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I come at it from a totally other end of things where, like for me, I kind of see an image in my head and I kind of prepare, but then on the day, and I can't work out if it's a case of me, like you say, like not knowing how to explain what I want, or if it's just me being really happy with what I got at the end, if you know what I mean, rather than sort of going in with this really determined, I'm going to get this. I kind of go in with I hope I get this, and then I'm just going to be happy with what I get out the other.
Well, I can see that working if you're doing a one-off, but I'm doing a series.
Yeah.
And I work in series. And so I have to be able to say the same thing over and over in an interesting way. So I have to be in control of my tools and what I'm doing. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to do it in that form, in a multiple picture form.
So you kind of need like a workflow and a formula for that series.
And once I get going, I'm just happy as a clam.
Yeah.
It's that first period is, it's hell on earth. It's like, why can't I get this? I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
That must be really awesome though, like when you get it and then you know how to repeat it and slightly change it each time and kind of get that series.
Yeah. Yeah. And, everybody, I have 2 daughters and they're both married and a husband. And we're sitting at the table about 2 months ago. I was working on a series not underwater this winter, and it's been kind of lurking in the background for many years. And I just had to do it finally and finish it and, move on. And it was really perplexing. I didn't quite know what it like. This was the frustration, is that I didn't know what I had to do. I just kept trying different things because I wasn't sure. I didn't have that preconceived vision. And I went a long way down the road with something that wasn't right. And I was miserable for months. And then finally at the dinner table, everyone's always talking about their week and how great this was and how terrible that was and whatever. And I just pipe up, I've just solved a really big problem. And they look up at me like, what problem can you have, Mom? You're a photographer, you're an artist. I'm so sorry I said that, because really it was a big problem. And I feel so much happier now, but I can't really tell you.
Can't explain it. I'll show you after I've done it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I just wanted you to know that I feel better.
Because it must feel like a blockage, right? Like you feel like you're kind of like everything is held back by this one thing that you can't solve.
Yeah. And it was more than a blockage. I couldn't see why what I was doing was bad. It really was bad. It interfered with the picture and it raised more questions than it answered. So it wasn't the tool that I needed to work with, but there was enough that was interesting about it that whenever I ask somebody, they go, I don't know. Yeah, keep going. You know? And that's how I was until finally I realized I did know, finally. But that's not the usual. It happens, every three series where I'll just think, wow, I have a great idea. And the idea wasn't really there.
Right.
So it sneaks up on you.
I mean, you've done such amazing series. Is there a series that you've done that you feel is the most important to you, or the one that you feel the most proud of?
Yes. it was my very first underwater shoot or show. I had this brainstorm. It happens sometimes during series where I just get this overwhelming urge to do a certain picture, and it works out right from the beginning. And that was this. It was called Underworld, the series, and it went to the Canadian Embassy in Tokyo and in Washington. And it was super successful from the very first frame of the very first piece of film. And it still sells today. And it was so simply made. I would speak to modeling agencies, and because it's underwater and the models couldn't use it for their portfolio per se, not the way I was shooting. I cut off their heads, and put them in clothing that was of my choice that wasn't particularly stylish. So the agency said, we'll send you the new girls.
Right.
And it invariably, I'd have to pick them up at the subway station because they were 16 and my house is hard to walk to. And then we'd get to the water, and then they'd tell me they do know how to swim, but they don't put their face in the water. And I was like, I knew it. And then I used to wear a lot of 20s clothes, lace and things like that. And I used that as the clothing. So she just changed into my clothing, and I went and put on my bathing suit, bathing cap. I didn't even know about weight belts. I took some weights, like, pumping iron weights, and I put it across, dumbbells, and I put them across my stomach. And that's how I kept myself down. And then I'd shoot film, and every 36 frames I'd get out, dry off, and put in a new roll of film, and then wait 3 days for the contact sheets to see, how it turned out. And no assistant, no anything, just me, my camera, and some lights, and the model, whoever they would give me. And some of the models were fantastic, and others said they couldn't swim. And even though they had said, I'm sure you've had that too. Oh, I really want to work with you. I can swim like a fish, but they can't. So, but I was desperate, and I'd say, oh, yes, you can. This is how we're going to do it. And it was very intimate too, two women talking to each other, no crowd, no pressure, none of that. And it was just pure joy. So that started me off. And I also decided to do this show because my shows go on forever, and I'm working on something. It goes on for a very long period of time. And I thought, well, it's Canada. And so I'll work until September, maybe. And then I have to be done. Right. So that was another reason why I decided to do it. I got the idea of shooting underwater because 25 years earlier, when I was working at a newspaper as a photographer, fashion photographer, I did this shoot underwater. I had to use a friend's mother's house, and it was so inconveniencing for them with the models dripping wet all over their floors and that sort of thing, that I just kind of put it in the back of my mind and said, well, this would be fun, but only if you have your own pool. Like, you can't do this in someone else's house. Yeah. And then lo and behold, I had my own pool for 2 years and didn't even think of it. So I got in the water with this show, got it started. And of course, because it was my own pool, I didn't stop in September or October or November. There are pictures of me walking into the pool with snow, big things of snow all around me while I'm, in my flip-flops getting in the water. The water was warm enough.
So it was heated.
It was heated, yes, for sure. And I never stopped after that. So that was like about 23 years ago. Wow. And I never stopped. So it was the whole idea of doing this underwater shoot so I'd be finished in time was a non-starter because I never stopped. So, and every year I just, by the time it's warm, I've got to do it again. But I'm glad I have the breaks. Yeah. So Underworld was the first show, and that went around to the embassies, and that was fantastic. And then the other show is the one I'm doing now, which because of COVID, I turned to flowers. And I had just started it before COVID, and it was just luck that was the next show that was coming up for me. It's called Appearances, and it opens actually in 2 weeks. Great. And it's got an incredible result. Like, people think, because I treated these flowers, they're individual flowers, and I treated them like they were my best friends. Right. And I began to see them as people with names and personalities, and one was like a more elderly flower woman, and another one was, a gawky, redheaded, freckle-faced teenager, and I just kept going at those flowers until I felt I discovered their personalities. And that was really fun. And they feel like oil paintings, and they're very substantial. They're large and rich in color and a totally different direction.
Right.
So I'm very proud. The other ones are takes on the figure, and this is no figure at all. So interesting.
You're saying that you're kind of like projecting these personalities onto these flowers, and obviously I haven't seen the work yet, but does that mean you're shooting them in different ways that you would to kind of capture that personality? Is it just You spent so much time with them, you kind of ended up giving
no, it's a bit of using your imagination. It's like when I don't know if you shoot fashion, but when you shoot fashion, when I do anyways, if I'm not feeling the dress, I can't shoot it. I can't do it. I can't do a good job. Right. That dress has to become, a real object, a real person for me, where I feel I've done it justice. This dress needs to be shot this way to enhance its beautiful ruffle, right, or its bias cut, so I go at it until I feel like I've got it. And same with the flowers. I did think of them as people. So I did think of them as, I've always done that. Like Brett, I anthropomorphize. What is that word?
Yeah, anthropomorphize.
Everything. Yeah. Anthropomorphize things like crazy. And when I was a kid, I used to sleep with teddy bears, lots of dolls and teddy bears in my bed. There would be rows of them, like maybe 6 rows up from my feet to my shoulders. And then every night the row would rotate and one at my feet would come up to the breathing space area, and every one of them had a name. And I've just done that all my life. And now I'm 68 and I'm still, making new best friends with inanimate objects.
That's amazing.
So it's kind of weird. But when I realized I was doing that, it made me remember the teddy bear thing. And actually I did it until I got this really large Lucky Green stamp doll, which was like kid size. And it was stiff plastic with the fingers that were all bent out like they're pointing at things. I tried to put her in bed with me, and she was going to poke my eye out. So that whole thing, I just said, I was 15 at the time.
It's time to move on. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I have a hard time letting go.
But I mean, it's great that you know that you do that, and you have connected with that. I think a lot of people and artists don't know why they do things, where I feel like you kind of have a good handle on why you need to feel a connection to your subject, whether it's living or inanimate. Well,
I've done it. I've been an artist for over 30 years now, and it's just, in the beginning, it's very hard to call yourself an artist. You don't feel like you really are. You're just making pictures. But over the years, having gone through the hard job of creating art on a consistent basis, you kind of take things not more seriously, but you give yourself credit for things. Yeah. It's like you just feel like you no longer say it's just luck, because a lot more went into it. And so a lot of times I don't know, for example, that teddy bear story, for example, it comes to you after. I once did a shoot, another series called the Toronto series. It was just, for some reason, out of the blue, I was an advertising photographer, and I just stopped, and my artist rep couldn't find me. I wouldn't answer her calls, and she ended up calling people to find me, because I got wrapped up in shooting in and around Toronto, and I had no idea why, is going out to these strange locations and shooting them. And I was working on another show at the time, and I brought the summer's work of what I'd shot into the gallery, and they said they love it. And what's it about? And I thought, well, I don't know. It just happened. But I had to write an artist statement. As I wrote it, I started to cry, because I realized it's funny the way your mind works. My grandmother started the series. My daughter had to interview her. She was 6 at the time. She had to interview her for school. And I had always really loved this particular grandmother. And I had been too afraid to ask her for session, portrait session. So after I did the video taping for my daughter's thing, the next morning I just got up the nerve and I packed my stuff, my gear, and put it in my car, and I shot her. And it was wonderful. And then from there, I went to the fairgrounds that I used to go with my parents, and I went to the neighborhood that I once grew up in, and I kind of went all over the city of Toronto retracing these things. And in September, the last picture I shot was I got a call I hadn't checked my answering machine, and I had many calls, which is never a good sign, from people who don't usually call you. And my grandmother had passed away. And I just stopped without even thinking about it, just stopped taking pictures. We, did the funeral, and then I picked up with my life. And then the gallery asked me to write about it. And I realized what happened was I was retracing my childhood without really understanding it, because I was working on a show of, just beautiful ruins that I found in Europe. And this was something that just came up suddenly. I did it for 3 months. Couldn't tell you why. I thought they were just snapshots, but I couldn't tell you why I couldn't stop either. I just had to keep going. Yeah. And then one day it ended. And in April, my gallery said, I think you should write an art statement about this. It took 6 months for me to figure that out, right. that was the, the underlying reason.
See, that sort of thing fascinates me, because I don't consider myself an artist. I consider myself someone who creates images, I don't. And the reason I don't consider myself an artist is because of kind of everything you just said, that feeling in your own work and putting yourself into it and all that sort of stuff. And, and kind of even not knowing what your work is about until you kind of spend, 6 months trying to work it out yourself. I think that's really interesting and fascinating.
Well, I found it really shocking that I didn't know, that my mind wouldn't allow me to go there for a while. It's fascinating.
But sometimes we're the last to know, right? Yeah. I think it's such a beautiful way of making sense of the world as well, is doing it visually this way.
Yes. I seriously believe that being a photographer has saved my life many times. I just get so caught up in it that I don't register what's really going on. If I'm in crisis, I will take a picture. That's why I've just been so occupied with projects. I've done like 3 projects in this past 6 months period, because it's COVID and obviously I'm freaking out. But because I'm taking pictures, I'm okay. It's just the medium. If I had to write a book, I wouldn't be okay. But because I have this form that gets me totally outside of my own head and world, it's just my savior.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about your kind of visual style as well. I mean, I'm looking at the Toronto Places images and and knowing that this was shot in the 90s, I guess.
Yes.
So it's all film, and the styling of it is so painterly. Like I would assume these were paintings.
Well, that's my signature. I love photojournalism. I have to say that. And the show that I'm working on right now is that. But I didn't really get into photography and decide to actually throw my life into it until I saw work by this British/Parisian photographer named Sarah Moon. Do you know her work at all?
No, I don't.
She is the ultimate in painterly photography, and I have idolized her work. And she showed me that a photograph using a camera could be like creating a painting, and that was all I needed. So I never ever went into photography to be realistic. It's always me seeing things in my mind that are very painterly and trying to develop the tools to create them using a camera. And sometimes that's involved working with people in Los Angeles, by the way, to create cameras and extensions and things that will help me do what I need to do. But it's always on a per project basis. And it's always when it's not painterly enough, because I believe that I'm telling a story, and photography is too literal for me. It doesn't do it. There's always got to be another piece to the puzzle that makes it look like you can't just take it. It's not like a frame around a piece of the world that you
Yeah.
see. So that's always been the way I go at it.
And do you feel like that's your way of kind of filtering the world?
Well, I am not a realist.
Yeah.
Yes, I just realized that as you said it. I think you're right. It is the way I think of the world. I try very hard not to look into the future, and if I don't like the future, I block it out completely.
Right.
Or if I don't like the present, I'm able to block it out until I can deal with it. But that could be it. I mean, I'm just creating an alternate universe that is making me happier and more serene.
Yeah. I think as well, like since you're putting this kind of surrealism is probably not a great word for it, but it's this kind of artistic filter over everything. Does it kind of give you a bit of distance from the world as well? Like it kind of keeps it at arm's length?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. A little bit. I mean, it definitely helps me artistically because, like I said, I don't like to see it as it is. Reality and quick pictures with an iPhone don't do it for me.
Yeah, I think I'm the same. Like I'm not particularly drawn to documentary or reportage, or that sort of stuff. Of if it seems too real to me, I can't connect to it because I need something that's got a little bit of fantasy to it or something that seems a little otherworldly. And
even color,
yeah,
even color film is too much. I always alter the colors because reality is if you've got a perfectly balanced red, blue, green spectrum is boring.
Yeah, you want to challenge the eye a little bit and kind of give it something to fascinate over.
Well, and give it an environment, maybe something that you don't see every day.
Well, I mean, speaking of that, I mean, you'll work with the wet plates. I'm going to mangle this, but wet collodion, is that how you say it?
Yes, that's perfect.
Oh, awesome. So talk us through that, because is it a way of kind of putting a liquid on a surface and then transposing the photograph onto that liquid?
Exactly. What I love about it is that you make everything. So it won't, the product won't come off the shelves like everything in photography. Every film you use is discontinued. And I got tired of that. That was even happening in the 80s for me. So this process is, you're completely independent. You make your own film. It's collodion, and it's a liquid that you pour, in my case, across a piece of aluminum, thus the Tintype idea.
Yeah.
And as it gels over, you put it in a holder and expose it, and then you process it. So it's the ultimate. It's the original Polaroid.
Yeah.
And what I loved about it is that, it's very tactile. You're making the whole thing all the way through, cutting your tin, making your film, washing it. And then in my case, I was able to alter it a bit because I wasn't loving, it comes out as a tint, as a sepia toned picture. And it looked too historical for me. And I'm still working on this, but what I've done with this series is I've superimposed a color picture on top of it to give it a more modern feel, even though you can't really say it's more modern, a more interesting feel.
Yeah.
It interests me more, let's say. And the thing about these pictures is the back picture. It's two pictures that you're viewing on the wall. The one in the background is the tintype or a reproduction of it, so I can make it bigger. And that's sepia, brown and white.
Yeah.
And then I have front mounted to plexiglass my color picture. And that's about an inch in front of the sepia tone one. So you're looking through it, through color to see the other one. And I'm using, the original lenses from the 1850s and cameras from the 1850s. So it's just pure photography. It's not any Instagram filter, and you really feel like you're honoring the craft of photography when you're working in it. And the images you tend to make are much slower to come to. So you make maybe 10 images in a day. So each image has to be made. You're making sure you're not going to click the shutter 3 times. You're actually each picture takes about 15 minutes. So you're thinking it through all the process. It's fascinating. It's challenging. and you get a unique object at the end. So I've been working with that for about 10 years, maybe a little longer now.
Yeah.
And I'm just about to put out a show in that work. It's taken me all that time to learn it. It's one of the hardest things in photography to learn. If you get your chemistry wrong, or if the weather is warmer or cooler than yesterday, all kinds of problems that will happen, and you don't get a decent plate. So I've gone through all those mistakes, just like I did with underwater photography. And I've learned the camera as well, which was hard because an 810 camera with its swings and tilts and shifts is one thing. And then trying to get an image that you want, to have the control of that wonderful camera is not something you pick up overnight. So this is exactly the type of thing we were talking about earlier, where I don't look too far ahead, because if I had realized 10 years ago the long road ahead of me, I would have packed this little baby up and shipped it out. But I'm in so deep now.
You've
I've
come
made
too
it
far.
work.
Yeah,
I can't turn around at this point. So this is exactly what I was talking about. And it's my 1-2 punch.
Yeah. I mean, it's a killer. It looks amazing.
It's quite lovely, and it's something you don't see. That's the other thing, is that I love to create images that haven't been seen before. I mean, even with these flowers, flowers everybody shoots flowers, and I thought I'm going to shoot flowers in a way that hasn't been seen before, and I shot them underwater and in a certain way underwater, so that they look exactly like a painting. And I thought, well, then I'm going to, and I wouldn't put the show out. It's not ready for viewing unless it's got that special, thing that I'm looking for, that I need. I need to be able to see that it's going to be on its own shelf. This picture, it's going to look different and be intriguing.
I think that's what kind of drew me to your work, is that there is this innovative, it is like a search for something that hasn't been seen before. That is what I try to do in my work, is I'm always trying to innovate things that I haven't seen other people do. And I love that in other people's work, seeing something that...
Well, how do you do it?
I don't sleep a lot. So a lot of my thing is looking at other things. So I'm inspired by stuff that's already out there. So one of my earliest kind of shoots was I was working a lot with circus and with aerial trapeze artists above the water. And I was at a gig, shooting this gig, and I was looking at it going, this could probably work underwater. And so I took an aerialist artist who does a chains act, and we shot it underwater, and it was kind of the spark, and kept me going. And I've been doing this for like 8 years now. And, and I'm always trying to find new ways to do things that I haven't seen underwater before.
Yeah, because everywhere you look, when I see underwater photography, I go, oh yeah, I saw that a long time ago. Like that's something that, that's underwater photography 101. And I rarely see someone who's pushing the envelope.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. I think a lot of people who come into the underwater are so fascinated by just being there that they might not put a lot of effort into pushing the medium. They're so in love with the feeling and the look of it that a lot of people end up creating work that's very similar.
And they're so happy that they're alive.
Yeah.
I shot this and I was holding my breath and I was underwater and I was able to keep the camera straight and the model was okay and didn't actually look like she's bug-eyed. And
exactly.
So
yeah.
There is something magical about, just working in under the water. It really is a very beautiful feeling. So I can totally understand that.
It's the experience of it, I think, like for the photographer and for the model, I think it's something you don't get in everyday life. So, and like you say, it's like standing on the top of Everest, taking a picture of a butterfly or something, you're never going to get that experience anywhere else.
No, I know.
And I think the other thing that I really love about this work, and especially the wet plate stuff, is that whilst these photographs that are in these, I don't think are underwater, but the effect, the effect makes them still look like they're underwater. It took me a while to realize that they weren't. It looks like you're looking through the surface of the water.
Yes, yes. And that exactly right. Because the process of making it is, if you can imagine, you're spilling a gelatinous liquid across a plate. So it's rippling and dripping off. And it's like the whole process is very similar to the experience of working in water, because things are just moving and flowing over the plate as you're making the picture. And, and again, it's not all that realistic, and it can be dead sharp. I just chose not to go that route, but it has that same, and it's the same person. So I'm an underwater photographer who is shooting wet plate collodion in a studio, but it's the same person's eye. So I'm looking for the same feeling, just using, it's like an artist, a musician who picks up a guitar and then goes to percussion and then uses a sax. It's different instruments, different sounds, but it's the same person's rhythm and blues.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same spirit. It's the same soul that's creating it. Yeah. No, it's beautiful. And I think you say that in the kind of description or the statement of this work. It's very much like seeing a puddle on the ground, it's the world reflected through it.
Yes. And that's actually the first wet collodion show, but the one that I'm working on now is much more sophisticated, I guess. Yeah. That was amazing, because I saw a broken fountain, not knowing the fountain was broken, and it had all these statues in the fountain and little puddles of water that were reflecting parts of the statue. And I thought, wow. And it was an art museum. So I thought, wow, what an installation. That's fantastic. Oh. And then when I came back to Toronto, I looked up that fountain and I realized there were drainage problems, and they were fixing the fountain. So there were puddles on the floor only because it wasn't filled properly. And that just started me off on this whole thing. So I brought some slate into the studio and then splashed it with water and waited till the slate dried down in parts and reflected a figure into that water, so that where there was water, there was figure, otherwise there was stone. So I was trying to replicate what I had seen. And wet collodion was so perfect for that, because they were puddles of collodion film pushed across a piece of aluminum. And here were images interrupted by puddles of water. So it just, if you didn't actually make the print, you wouldn't understand that. But making of it was just, I always giggled to myself. This was crazy, and also in the studio, I was the fourth floor and I was worried that I'd leak down into somebody else. I'm busy with, buckets of water and a mini vac, or whatever you call those heavy duty storage, that I'd vacuum the water up and start again.
You're like some sort of crazy alchemist in this tower. Yeah.
Yeah. But the longer you stay in photography, the more you pick and choose bits from previous things that you've done that might combine beautifully with something you're currently working on. Yeah. So a little bit of underworld with a touch of white noise and a smattering of chromatics. And, you start to have these tools that you've developed previously that you're now, that give a certain look, but now you're combining them in all different kinds of ways to create another completely unique thing. So
I think that is such a beautiful kind of full circle as well, back to that question of, what do you do if everything keeps going wrong? And for me, I kind of hold on to those things that went wrong, because at some point I might find a use for them. Yes, it's not right for now. Yeah.
And also I find that you learn. It's painful, but you learn so much from a mistake. What do you learn from doing the same thing over and over again?
Oh yeah, you don't grow from success. You grow from failure.
No, yes, and we're very successful because we've had a lot of failure.
Exactly. Yeah, it evens out after a little while. Barbara, thank you so much. This has been fascinating. Just hearing your approach to everything has really kind of it's sparked a lot within me. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Brett. It was fun to talk about it.
Thanks for listening, everyone. And as always, if you like the podcast, please subscribe, review, and share. If you'd like to support the production of these episodes, you can purchase our very cool merchandise at theunderwaterpodcast.com. We've got branded coffee mugs, stickers, beer cozies, and posters featuring our amazing illustration and logo by Joe Hodino. If you'd like to connect with us or learn more about our guests, you can reach us at theunderwaterpodcast.com or on Instagram. We also have a Facebook group where you can discuss the episodes and even get your questions answered by the guests. There's a link to it in the show notes. You can learn more about my underwater photography workshops and mentoring at brettstanley.com or Brett S Photo on Instagram. The Underwater Podcast is presented and produced by me, Brett Stanley, and our music is Neo by Oh Boy. Keep creating, everyone. I'll see you in the water.